Hello, and welcome to our next presentation. On behalf of the MIT CDOIQ Virtual Symposium, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors who have continued to support the symposium during this very challenging year. Before we thank our partners, we'd like to ask that sometime during the symposium's breaks that you visit our partners' virtual booths. You can also visit the Content Hub on the MIT CDOIQ website for some great partner resources. We'd like to thank the following partners: Deloitte, Informatica, Privacy Analytics, DEWEX, Fusion Alliance, KPMG, Sandal Consultants, Tamer, Elation, Ali Data, Big ID, Boomi, Caserta, Citizen, Data Kitchen, Garage, Wakira, Pylog, Click, ThoughtSpot, Eckerson, Global IDs, Snowflake, Starburst. And as I said, please make every effort to visit our partners, use the virtual passport, because without them and our partner support, the symposium could not be held. Thank you.
And good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to session 13D. The title is Best Practices in Valuing and Democratizing Use to Improve Business Outcome. Our speaker, Blake Andrews, is a corporate vice president for data governance at New York Life Insurance, a company that's been on the forefront of some of these efforts and for many years has been supportive of these data initiatives. The focus here specifically is on how to learn as a data person how the business values and sees these things. So best practices around some specific topics here, but the vision for valuing data assets and also literacy, which seem to be recurring topics this entire conference. Blake, we're looking forward to your presentation. I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Go ahead and share my presentation. All right. Again, my name is Blake Andrews, and I am with New York Life Insurance. I've been with the company since early 2017. So I am responsible for our data governance platforms. That includes the Informatica data governance tools, as well as our MDM solution as well. So today I want to talk through, as was mentioned, data governance and how we're applying data democratization and marrying the concepts of democratization with our governance program and helping to build literacy across the company. So just to give you a little bit of background about New York Life, we are 175 years old this year. This is 2020 is our 175th anniversary. It's a big year for us. New York Life is the largest mutual life insurance company in the United States. We're also more than just a mutual insurance company. We have a wide range of products and services that includes annuities, long-term care insurance, investment products such as mutual funds and ETFs. We also have institutional investments and investment services that for everything from real estate investments and mortgages, things of that nature, to individual investor services. So a wide range of products and services, and with that comes a wide range. And one of the things that we are incredibly proud of is our financial strength of our company. You don't get to be 175 years old without a view of the long term and being prudent investments and the decisions that you make based on data and based on the information that you have at your fingertips. So really, this type of thinking is kind of baked into the DNA of New York Life. So when we look at democratization, this is a term that's been around for probably close to 20 years. In fact, I kind of did an informal search of the internet, just trying to go back and see what was the earliest point that I could find any literature specifically referencing the term data democratization. I stumbled across a white paper from a SaaS user conference in 2003 that talked about democratization of geographic and bringing in basically geocoded data and making those data sets available to a wide variety of users. So it's kind of interesting that this is not a new concept, but something that's something that companies are continuing to strive for. But when you think about democratization, it's not just democratization. I'd like to think of it as not just an endpoint. It's actually a means to an end. It's something that helps you facilitate, and in that sense, as you're trying to drive business value, there's kind of a spectrum here of democratization. How much control do you centralize or decentralize within your organization? Traditionally, you think of making data accessible with no gatekeepers, right? And that's kind of been the traditional definition that many people ascribe to. But in practice, that seldom comes into play. There's got to be some type of control and some type of gatekeepers, because of there's too many risks for misuse and other potential challenges. So you have to be you have to kind of fit the slider to your organization. When we look at New York Life, originally prior to 2015, we were more of a centralized control organization. A lot of the, especially when it came to the consumption of data, but as we started to shift to our big data strategy in 2015, 2016, we slid more of to the decentralized end of the spectrum for our democratization. So we'll talk through a little bit kind of how that impacted our organization and what we've seen since then. So the data lake was supposed to solve this democratization issue. The lake was built for self-service analytics, and you'll occasionally hear me refer to it as a data hub. That's how we have branded it internally. So you'll occasionally I'll slip up in external audiences and call it the data hub. So you'll have to bear with me. Just know that data lake and data hub are synonymous in our architecture. So, but we have a multi-zoned data hub, and the idea is that raw sources are ingested, or operational data stores are ingested into the source zone, and then the data is processed through the history zone and then moved into conformed models in the conform zone, where you would start to see that consumption of data. So the idea here was that we would ingest these legacy operational data stores to shift this consumption to the data hub. And obviously, in these types of situations, there's this concern of the data swamp, right? You want to avoid the data swamp. And so the catalog was going to be a key component for us to make sure that we knew what was being ingested, knew we had a good handle on the assets that we had in the data lake. And down there at the bottom, you'll see this blue bar for the tenant zone. And the tenant zone was really intended to be kind of an area of experimentation where individual teams and data engineers across the organization, where again, this was kind of democratized and decentralized, these data engineers would have a sandbox to play in. They would have their own individual tenant zones for each team that they could go and spin up a new solution, pilot it out, and then as that solution is proven out, it gets to a good point where you're ready to productionalize it, you move it into the curated zone. Well, what ended up happening is the tenant zone just continued to grow. The curated zone never really took off the way that we had hoped and anticipated that it would. In fact, at this point, we have over 350 tenant zones in the data hub. 70% of those are inactive, so we only have about 115 active tenant zones. But the data in those 115 tenant zones represents 94% of all of our Tableau consumption. So all of the 94% of all the data in Tableau dashboards comes from these tenant zones. Now, this causes issues because each of the tenant zones, or it's represented as one common zone, but it's actually individual zones that are siloed. So the idea was that those siloed zones would provide security for data that wasn't protected, whether it was tokenized um, or encrypted. So users could have a little bit of flexibility in working with raw data in those zones. Well, as this happens, the tenant zone these tenant zones and their usage continue to expand, but we ended up siloed, where you have each team has their own individual tenant zones where they've built their own small empires. So we certainly had a series of challenges here. As I had mentioned before, there's the conformed and processed zones in the hub, where the centralized data teams, the data management team, was building and has been building for a few years now, several repositories that are really kind of enterprise level databases. We've seen a limited adoption of those data sets because users simply go to the source zone, bring that data into replicate the data from the source directly into the tenant, and continue to build there. Now, obviously, this is, the question is isn't this part of what you want from a democratization perspective? You want users to quickly be able to respond and prototype, and that is definitely one of the benefits. But we're not seeing the right usage of the right data sets, and there's a lot of redundant effort that goes into this proliferation of data that gets siloed in these tenant zones. Thus, we've had a lot of the processing that's done in our data lake to move data between these different zones and to build these data sets is really unused. We don't have the ability to govern the data in the tenant zones the way we would like to. There's limited visibility because the access is limited. And we have a lack of security standards around these tenant zones. So as I mentioned before, we don't have the requirements that the data is tokenized or encrypted, simply because those are access controlled zones. So the theory is, well, it's out of sight, out of mind, everything's fine. But that isn't necessarily the case, especially if you aren't being mindful of the way that you would approach handling that data. So ultimately, what happens is you have a real difficulty for our data engineers across the company in finding, accessing, and understanding the data that doesn't exist in the lake. If it's in the lake, they typically can use the catalog and the other resources at their disposal to find that information. But anything that hasn't been ingested is a real struggle for them. So this comes into play in this example here on the right-hand side of the screen, where earlier this year, actually in April of this year, as COVID was ramping up and companies were starting to look at their response, starting to look at how this was impacting performance, New York Life was no different. One of our senior executives in our core life insurance industry asked our data science team to utilize a multivariate model to look at the impact of COVID-19 on the year-over-year sales for our agent workforce. So the agent or the data engineering team for our data science group spent an entire weekend scrambling to find data, trying to get access to a few data stores that had not been ingested into the hub, and so trying to bring that data into their tenant zone. So at the same time, a simultaneous effort from our agency team trying to solve the same problem. So what the two teams didn't know is that they were both trying to answer the same problem, but they continued to work in silos, and neither had access to the other's data. And so the data science team, because they weren't experts in the agency data, they were struggling to understand the meaning of the data sets that they were finding. Despite these challenges, they did manage to deliver their analysis, but they ended up having difficulty reconciling the data with other teams and some of the other reports. So this was something that over the next several weeks was reconciled. It took about a month reconcile that. And then this report now became an ongoing part of the situational reporting metrics, and part of the packet that our executives would be looking at. And so has to be generated in the tenant zone. We don't have the ability to automate these processes. It has to be manually initiated by the data engineering team. So one of the things that we've done, we looked at this as kind of a primary example of kind of the cultural aspects of the situation we've created with our democratization approach. So one of the things that we've done to address this is create a role called the data solution architect. Now this data solution architect is designed to be kind of an arbiter of these data requests that are coming from various teams. So they are working with data engineers, data scientists, and data analysts embedded with the various business teams across the company. And the data solution architect, either the DSA as we call them, is working to help answer these questions. What are the best sources to fulfill the request? Are there duplicate requests? This is kind of one of the things that through this process we've kind of surfaced up the ability to the DSA has recognized the patterns where one team will come in with a request, and within maybe a day or two, another team will come in with a similar request, typically resulting from the same meeting or the same conversation with an executive. So everybody's looking to get those answers, and so this DSA is able to kind of moderate this conversation and help all parties involved get the right data, and also provide that bridge or that interface into technology, so that where technology resources are needed to be brought to the equation, that can happen. We also can bring the appropriate data stewards in to help provide the right meaning, the right context for the data, so that these teams, that they're working in data that may not necessarily be part of their natural line of business, that's something that they can still get a good understanding. We have several tools at the disposal of the data solution architect. Axon, the Informatica Axon platform, is being chief among them. Our enterprise logical data model is a big effort that we've spent the last 2 years building, and so it's become the basis for these managed data sets that I referred to earlier. These enterprise governed data sets that we've built within our data lake. We also use the enterprise data catalog as an important resource and an important tool for our data solution architects. So then the question becomes, okay, well, you have a data solution architect, and what does this look like? How do you go from a situation where teams are operating independently and there's a lot of redundancy in the system, to a situation where we can prioritize these important data sets? How do we start moving the needle, shifting from teams working in these unmanaged areas where they kind of have free reign, and start shifting them into the more governed and approved enterprise data sets? So one of the things that we had to do was reprioritize our work on the cataloging of our assets. Our focus here was this assumption that utilization is the main driver for value. Now, this is that seems like kind of an obvious statement, but as we were going through our initial logical data modeling efforts over the last 2 years, utilization was a driving factor, but it wasn't the driving factor. It was our work there. We had built kind of a tiered structure looking at the foundations of data and how we should be bringing different systems together. And so utilization of that data was a part of that consideration, but it wasn't the primary driver. Over the past, I would say, 6 months or so, we've pivoted to focusing, because we've got a good foundational level of understanding around our data and a good foundational repository of assets in the catalog. Now we're turning to focus on utilization. And when I say utilization, really focusing on that consumption layer. So what is going into these reports, these dashboards and Tableau, things of that nature, focusing on that end of the spectrum and that end of the delivery. So really, we've spent a lot of time comparing the access logs for our data hub. We've compared that with the lineage from our data catalog to identify which assets are being most frequently accessed, which assets are being frequently leveraged for a given report or dashboard. And then once we kind of identified those high value assets that are most consistently leveraged, we start to try to work on reducing the redundancy. So identifying teams that are using common data sets that they've copied down into their local tenant zones and saying, okay, you've built a dashboard that has similar metrics with similar base data as this team. What can we do to bring this together, operationalize one dashboard, and make it ubiquitous for the entire company so that everybody gets what they need from that one single view, and publish that into the public area within the processed or curated zones of the data hub, rather than having that sit in these isolated siloed tenant zones. So this is work that we've really been pushing forward with our data engineers and our data analysts to try to leverage these certified data sources. And as we've encountered data sources that these users have built that maybe is a different take or a different flavor of the data that we have in our public zones, we offer the opportunity for these data engineers and analysts to actually have their data sources or the data sets certified, as well as the reports and dashboards. So giving them kind of an incentive to say, hey, look, let's operationalize this, let's certify your work and show that this is ready for enterprise level consumption. Now, that's one part of the equation, but then the question becomes, well, we've operationalized this this enterprise level dashboard. We've brought it back into the public domain within the company. What then? What do we do with this at that point? So at this point, the next step is for us to really engage with our data stewards and bring the data stewards and the data engineers together to make that connection and that alignment between the data catalog and the data glossary. So how do we align the data assets in the catalog to the business context that's provided in the Axon platform? So this has been a big emphasis for our users or for our data steward community, and we're starting to be able to move the needle and shifting these responsibilities for maintaining this documentation in Axon to our data engineers. It's an interesting paradigm. As we started to do this work to the data engineers, they saw the intrinsic value in understanding what assets were available to them, and having a place that data consumers can go, so the users of their reports can go to find this information and have a better understanding of the context of this data that's contained in the dashboards and reports. Burden off of the data engineers and the data analysts to have to repeatedly explain their work to new parties as they discover these assets. So they don't have to consistently be consulted on a regular basis. The institutional knowledge that lives in these data engineering teams now becomes part of the Axon platform and becomes part of the overall landscape of data that's easily discoverable within this platform. Now, One of the things that is really kind of starting to shift the emphasis for us is the concept of a data marketplace. We would, this is something that's been on our roadmap since I joined New York Life. It was something that was kind of a 5-year dream. We've seen other companies that have built similar storefronts, and unbeknownst to us, when we started our journey with our data governance program, Informatica had actually explored the possibilities of creating this digital storefront or this data marketplace capability as well. So this is something that we are looking to enable from Informatica, and it's actually the beauty of the situation for us is it's built within the Axon governance platform. So in this situation, we are able to make the connection between the work of our data stewards and these data engineering teams. They can directly build the information, and it's not just there from a reference perspective for users to investigate and find the information, but they can act upon it now. They can actually take the information that they discover, whether it's a data set or a report, and initiate a request to have that data provisioned for them, or have their access to that data provisioned. So this digital storefront will create kind of a shopping cart experience where users can go and search through a set of curated data. Now, this is the important part of this. This is helping to drive the traffic and the utilization from these individual to the certified, published, enterprise level areas of consumption that we've built in the data lake in the public zones, so that users are able to reconcile the information across the various reports and data sets that they're leveraging. Now, the other piece of this is, we're looking to drive crowdsourcing of rating and reviewing of data assets. This is an important part of our strategy. We want to encourage that feedback from users to say, hey, this is a good report, this is valuable data, this is something I can trust. Or if you find other sources that questionable lineage, then at that point you can flag those and provide feedback about the defects of a given data set as well. So that's definitely something that we find a lot of value in, is the social aspects of this marketplace, and being able to understand how users are leveraging this content and what they find valuable. Now, the concept of data literacy is a big focus of emphasis for us. Over the last 2 years, we've really focused on building literacy within our data practitioners. So, the data engineers, the data analysts, of course, there is some base level of literacy there, but it's really about bringing everybody to the same plane, establishing the same data foundations, the same standard operating procedures, and making sure people understand the rules of the road and how they should be operating. Now we're shifting to more of an end user data consumer focus within our data literacy program. Now, we haven't abandoned our practitioners, the analysts and the engineers. We've actually brought them along with us and said, we want you to be the evangelists. We want you to be the resources that people go to and consult with on, hey, how can I use these tools to be a better consumer of data? So, our chief data office is a relatively small team. It's 20 people, and that includes 2 project managers. So for a company of 12,000 employees, it's a relatively small team. So we don't have the ability to be everywhere all at once, and so this is an important role that our data practitioners can play. We are focused on building that foundational understanding amongst our data consumers, providing in-depth training on how they can use the tools. And these are tools, everything from how do you use Tableau. We leverage the Dremio platform to do some of the virtualization of our data and acceleration of the queries and reporting. So how can you use Dremio to help build your own data sets? We've also focused on kind of the mid-level management and lower-level management, and how to drive decision making through data. How can users or how can those managers start asking the right questions of their teams to kind of prompt those explorations of, than basing this on anecdotal evidence or things of that nature. So we built a multi-channel approach. We are an internal, or we have built an internal advertising campaign on our company intranet. We have a series of articles that come out on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. We kind of alternate, depending on the development. But we are continuing to build out content that will drive users and drive data consumers to our platforms, just tying in with various business initiatives to highlight where our tools have been utilized to make a difference, or to provide a new delivery. We also are conducting virtual training sessions, and this is something that actually predated the COVID-19 situation. We are a distributed team, so our data office sits across 3 offices. I myself am located in Dallas, Texas. We have a team located in Clinton, New Jersey, as well as a team in Manhattan. So we've learned to work virtually, and so the conducting virtual training sessions is something that we've definitely had adapted to before COVID, but this is has served us well over the past 6 months now, as we've continued to build on this, to exhaust a lot of effort to try to stand up that virtual methodology. We've also built learning pathways, directed videos, and quick reference guides. So when users have gone through a broader virtual training session to really dive into the specifics of a product, and they need a quick refresher, hey, how do I do this? We have learning pathways and quick reference guides that can quickly direct them to the answer that they're looking for, help them get to the information that they need. Obviously, one of the classics in this is the lunch and learn approach. We use the lunch and learns as kind of a socialization, providing an introduction to a topic and trying to generate interest, trying to drive users to our learning pathways and eventually to our virtual training sessions. So this is the lunch and learn method is always a good way to kind of bring those parties together. Within the COVID space, this has kind of taken a hit. The lunch and learn is always a valuable tool. I feel like when you're in person, it's oftentimes the conversations that happen after the meeting, or the 5 minutes setting up and somebody comes up to ask a question. Those are some of the most interesting catalysts for exploration and innovation in that sense. So we haven't had the same level of interaction on that front, and looking forward to getting back to a situation where we can be more interactive on those lunch and learns. But the other big effort that we've taken on from a data literacy perspective is building a data champion network across the business. This entails a couple of things. So we've really worked on and continue to work on the messaging with executive leaders. Obviously, I'm sure many of us are aware of the situation where a senior leader will make a request or will ask for a set of analysis, and multiple teams will probably jump at that, and everybody's seeking to solve the problem, right? It's a good environment, a good problem to have, but at the same time, that rush to solve the problem by any means necessary sometimes creates the problems that we've seen in our environment, where users don't follow the kind of the standard operating procedures. They don't stay within those guideposts that have been established along the way. So we really worked with the Data Champion Network to help them understand how to better message those requests, and when they pose one of those questions, making sure that there are specific that are related to the teams as they go about solving these problems or answering these questions. So what is the preparation? How quickly does this need to be delivered? Oftentimes, what we found is that teams will jump on something with the belief that, hey, this needs to be solved next week. This needs to be solved tomorrow. And oftentimes, the senior leaders don't necessarily share that expectation. It may not be quite as high of a priority for them. It's definitely something they want answered, but they would like to see that answer come across the right way, and be able to trust the data and not have to rework the solution. Going back to the anecdote that I provided earlier, where the got the information, was appreciative of the effort, but at the same time there was additional work that had to go into reconciling that data with the other reports and information that they were receiving. So trying to make sure that the pieces fit together and that you can reconcile all that information and get an accurate picture. So that work that we do with our Data Champion Network is really important to helping foster the right environment. And it's something that I saved it for last on this slide because it's kind of one of those save the best for last concepts that I feel like there's a lot of value in that work that we've invested. So the next thing that we're looking at is, how does all of this evolve? There's a couple areas that I want to highlight on this slide. The first is here under the data experience. We've worked on building an appropriate use framework to try to as we continue to refine our democratization strategy. One of the things that has always been kind of in the back of our minds is, how do we make sure that data isn't being used inappropriately? How do we make sure that our data engineers and our data science teams are making the right decisions on how to leverage this data, and not putting the business at risk? So this is where a couple of things. Our data solution architect team has been a big driver for this effort and this work, in helping us stand up an appropriate use framework and a tool as kind of a triage, if you will, as these requests come across the data solution architect. They look at what types of data. We have a matrix that we've built of the associated risk, given those two dimensions, so the category of data and its use. So that what happens is when you come across a high risk area, that triggers touch points with our general counsel teams, our risk and compliance teams. So we are able to bring those resources to bear in a very targeted way. We don't want to have to consult risk and compliance and general counsel on every request that's coming across. And part of their concern was in these high risk areas, no two fact patterns are the same. It's a very we joke that it's a very typical approach of an attorney. There's no two cases that are truly the same, and the fact patterns are always different. So they're going to want to review any of those situations where it is a high risk activity, or there is a high risk associated with that use. So that this is a way for us to surface those things up to those teams. The other thing that I'll highlight here on this slide is the data protection that we see here on the right hand side. What we're hoping is that, or what we're able to do now, we've reached a certain level of maturity in both the data experience side of our program and the data protection side of our program, where we can start to converge these two roadmaps and start to bring these capabilities together. So data protection has been somewhat segmented. You have a certain set of controls that exist within our data hub or data lake environment, and then a certain set of controls that exist within the operational data stores. And so it's kind of become this idea that you have multiple sets of rules that you have to manage and know, well, where am I working and how do I work with this data? Now we're working on bringing all of that together into one kind of borderless protection program that will allow us to apply the same rules and the same standards, no matter where we are in the organization, whether we're in the operational data stores or if we're in the data lake, or as we begin to transition our data lake into the cloud. This allows us to converge cloud computing strategy and also extend that data protection into the cloud, which is definitely a critical consideration that is a necessity for all teams. So one of the things that I wanted to revisit is this idea of value and how we measure value. As I talked before, we kind of after we established the foundations of our data in our logical data or in our logical data model program, we then went back and said, okay, let's shift our focus to utilization and assigning value to utilization. But now that we've done that, we've started to wonder, okay, what's next? How do we continue to build this? How do we continue to evaluate data and also show the progress of the organization? And so what we're looking at is really a shift in kind of the valuation paradigm to start looking at the entire picture, not just utilization, but what are we doing to enrich the data that's being utilized? So how much data is being certified? How much data has had a business context attached to it and applied with the glossary? Where do we have our data quality measurements? Where are those data quality measurements meeting the minimum thresholds and exceeding our targets? Where do we have good definitions of lineage so that we can understand those assets that have a critical impact to downstream solutions? Also looking at the stakeholder accountability, where have we assigned stakeholders, and how do we assign a value to that ownership and that accountability that we have with our stakeholders? And then, as I mentioned before, this concept of crowdsourcing and the ratings and feedback that we gather from our engineers, our data scientists, our data analysts, our consumers. How do we assign value to that rating and to that feedback that we get on these various data sets? And so this is something we're actually working closely with Informatica to help bring these things to bear and bring all of this into one picture within our data catalog, and start assigning values to each of these types of activities, and monitoring how many assets have this certification, what is the value of that certification, so that we can begin to track that incremental increase in data value over time. So with that being said, I will open it up to questions.
Blake, first of all, thank you for a really detailed and thorough explanation covering three very, very different topics here, and you've woven them together. I have to ask the first question myself as the person running the thing, right? Anyway, you speak to a very tight, cohesive group, and I wonder how you would react to survey results that sort of consistently show that the technology portion is not really the major challenge here, but the people in the process issues are. And I think you're supremely qualified to comment on that.
Absolutely. And the process is the ultimately the focus. Our perspective has always been that the people and the process is where this tends to fall apart. And typically it's the when I say people, it's not the actual lack of skills within your technical roles. It's just the lack of enforcement. And so one of the things that we focused on is really incentivizing uh, these incentivizing our data professionals and our data practitioners. So how do we bring them to the table and show value in the platforms that we've put together in the technology? Because the technology at the end of the day is just a tool or a facilitation mechanism, but we really have to design solid processes. But at the same time, it is a difficult balance. We I was sitting in a meeting yesterday where we were talking through, okay, how do we respond to some of these more urgent requests? How do we continue to refine this data solution architect program and this level of engagement that we've built, while also uh, respecting the fact that there are urgent requests are going to come through that can't follow this established pathway. So that's definitely something that we continue to work on and continue to build those processes. But I think a big part of that is the communication factor. And as you encounter these requests that have to be exceptions to the rule, that have to fall outside of the process, how do you go in on the back end and create those controls in the system to say, okay, you've delivered this solution. Is this a one-time thing, or is this uh, an ongoing part of the larger enterprise solution that we need to then operationalize and make it scalable to the organization and make it available to everyone? So that's definitely something that we've done on the back end, is tried to build in some of these communication touch points and these controls to follow up. Uh, you know, communicating when those types of requests come through, and then following up on the back end to say, what's the final disposition of this? How do we treat this forward?
And that actually issue resolution is a very tangible output that you can point to as well. So,
Absolutely.
these things got definitively solved as we were working through the process. Um, Another aspect of this, I think that a lot of people really wonder about is when you've got such a very good focus on this, how tightly do you um, influence, support, interact with the overall arching strategy in there? Is there a periodic, refresh? Are you guys 100% embedded with each other? How does that work out?
Yeah,
Because that
I
I
mean,
would imagine provides a lot of your focus, right?
it does, and it continues to evolve. This is something that we've really kind of built up over the past, I would say, 8 months. It was something that had been part of our strategy. As we evolved, we knew that this was the direction we were going to move to, and so we started planting those seeds. But as the COVID response became uh, a big point of emphasis, this was something that kind of moved to the forefront and really became a point of emphasis for us. So we have paid a lot of deliberate attention to it, and it really is about setting up those touch points, keeping that communication up. We've kind of revitalized our and created what we call our originally it was a data, what we called our data experience council. And in that sense, it's kind of interesting how nomenclature of an organization can impact the perception. So with this data governance council, it was always kind of not, I guess it turned into a readout of the activities of the teams, but there was never really much in the way of prioritization. The council didn't feel empowered to help set the priorities and help change direction, things of that nature. And it all came down to one word, came down to the word council. And when to those of us who came from outside of New York Life, we didn't really understand this. We struggled with why are we not getting the level of engagement and buy-in from these senior stakeholders to say, what we would ask help in prioritization, and we never really got much. We never really got much in that direction. And when we changed it to the word committee, we revamped the group and said, okay, we're calling this the Data Experience Committee. when we did that, the paradigm changed. And because in the nomenclature, a committee is empowered to make decisions. They're empowered to set direction, to allocate resources. And so that was, it's sometimes it's little things that can help empower that. But that data experience committee has been a very valuable piece of the puzzle for us in helping to kind of helping us to find the right guidepost to establish, right, and helping to say, okay, how do we maintain the right level of control, bringing it back to the central, bringing that level of control back to the center a little bit, but without hindering the individual team's ability to deliver, to the expectations of their management.
You know what the young people would say to that? Nice. Yeah, I mean, really, you're describing ideal conditions. Hey, listen, we do have a question here. I want to make sure we get these in. How important were the Accord standards as an input for this initiative? I would assume you started with some of those.
We started with Accord early in our logical modeling efforts. It was a reference point for us. We don't have strict adherence to Accord. That is, in our experience, Accord is tailored more towards the P&C side, so property and casualty side of insurance. There are obviously elements there for life insurance, but we felt like the diversity of our business, and with the investment products, the annuities, all these other types of products that are included, we wanted to create our own flavor there. So Accord was definitely a reference point, but it wasn't. We're not strictly adherent to Accord in that sense.
And that really is part of the rationale, because the influence still would be there if it was, appropriate. You're trying to derive essential descriptions of these new functionality that you're doing. And that's
Absolutely.
really quite a good exercise. And again, thank you for sharing this with the rest of the group here. We're actually out of time at this point, but I want to thank you for taking the time to do this, and for generating some questions, and most importantly, giving us a very concise, tremendous amount of information in this wonderful presentation here. So again, Blake Andrews, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
And thank you, everybody. This concludes the broadcast day for the second day of the 14th annual MIT CDOIQ. We are looking forward to seeing everybody tomorrow as we jump back in with some really super keynotes and finish the day with a full set of presentations all the way going. Most of what you're seeing here today is going to show up on the web very shortly afterwards. I can't guarantee it's going to be hours or anything like that, but yesterday's stuff actually showed up at the end of yesterday. Or I'm sorry, some of yesterday's stuff showed up at the end of yesterday. So take a look for it, and you can start to see what was going on in all those other sessions with those other really great titles that we couldn't all get through. Anyway, thanks so much, and we'll see you tomorrow.